All right, so for this graph, because we have arrows that point up, so there are two arrows that point up, we don't have an absolute maximum. So for absolute max, you're going to say none. Excuse me, sir. Thank you. Now, this is a little bit different than the one we did yesterday because can you tell that there is one that's lower? So there's two dips. We have a dip here and we also have a dip here. But one of these is clearly lower than the other one. So this is actually going to be called, this is my absolute minimum. Because it's the lowest. And the second one over here, we call that my relative minimum because it's a dip, but it's not the lowest. All right, so let's go ahead and label those points. So for my absolute minimum, that looks like it's about, if I zoom in, -2, -4. And for my relative min, that looks like that's about +4, -1. All right, and then there's also this point right here. It's not the highest point, but it's a hilltop. So we would call that our what? What'd you say? The relative maximum, right? And what is that point? 2,0, good. All right, so now I want you to look at the graph and determine where your x-intercepts are and your y-intercepts. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this. Show me with your fingers how many x-intercepts do you think we have? 3. Yep. So there's 3. So we have one here, and one here. So that would be -3, +2, +5. And then our y-intercept, show me with your fingers. How many y-intercepts do you see? Yep, just one. And where is that at? -2. All right, there's a second graph. Let's go ahead and look at that second graph. And we're going to answer those same questions about the second graph. Go ahead and add arrows to the graph. Yes. All right, I want you to take about 2 minutes or 60 seconds and fill out all of these questions by yourself because we do have a test next week. And I want you all to practice identifying it. If it's wrong, nobody's going to know but you. But I want you to answer every single question, what you would write if it were on the test. Just take a guess and answer all 6 questions, and then we'll go through them together. Okay. So, absolute max, what would you say? None. So, anytime you have an arrow that points up, so this is none, and I'm going to write Y. The reason why is because there is an arrow pointing up. If you have an arrow that points up, you will not have, oh, I put that on the wrong line. So it doesn't have a minimum because there's an arrow that points down. And it doesn't have a maximum because there's an arrow points up. And let's talk about that a little bit more. The absolute minimum is the lowest the graph will go. But if the graph is going to keep going down, it never hits the lowest point. The absolute maximum is the highest point the graph will reach. But if the graph continues to go up, it never hits the highest point. Relative minimum is a dip in the graph. Now, we don't have an absolute minimum, but we do have a relative minimum right here. That is a dip in the graph. I'm going to label that relative minimum. And that point is at 2, 0. And then we also have a relative maximum right here. And if I zoom in, that looks like that's about -1.5. All right, show me with your fingers how many x-intercepts do you see? There's 2. The first one is at -2. And the other one is at +2. And your y-intercept, there's only 1, and that is at 4. All right, so now go to your notes packet. We're going to add one more thing, one more characteristic, because when you take your test next Friday, you have to tell me domain, range, absolute min, absolute max, relative min, relative max, x-intercept, y-intercept. And the last thing we're going to talk about is in behavior. So can someone tell me what page we left off on yesterday? 10? 8. Let's go to page 8 and let's talk about in behavior in your notes packet. So in behavior is the behavior of the graph as it approaches positive and negative infinity. So when we say x approaches positive, this is referring to the right arrow. Right arrow. Because that side is where x is positive. And then x approaches negative, that's the left arrow. And what we're asking is the graph going up or is the graph going down? If the graph is going up, so when the graph goes up, which would be right here, then we say it's approaching positive infinity. And that's what we would put here on this line. But if the graph is going down, then we say it's approaching negative infinity. So when we talk about in behavior, we're simply going to put a positive infinity or a negative infinity. All right, so let's go ahead and write our statement out. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So in the note packet, we did not put the statement. So we are going to have to write it out for these first examples. But in your homework assignment, which is due tomorrow, we'll talk about that. I'm going to check it, stamp it tomorrow. The homework on your skills check and test, it is written for you. So let's go ahead and write it though. So when you write an in behavior statement, when we're talking about the left side, we say as x approaches negative infinity, f of x, and that arrow means approaches. And we're going to write that again for the right, except on the right, x is positive. So I'm going to give you a minute to write that, and then we will fill in. I'm going to go ahead and put a blank. We're going to fill in the blank. And when I say left and right, I'm talking about the left and right side of the y-axis. So this is my y-axis. This is my left arrow. This arrow represents my left in behavior. And this arrow represents my right in behavior. So in behavior is exactly the way it sounds. What is the graph doing on the end? So in behavior is exactly the way it sounds. What is the graph doing on the end? So the graph has two ends. It has two arrows. So what is it doing on the left? What is this arrow doing? Is it going up? Is it going down? Or is it going straight? It's going up. So that means on the left, which would be this in behavior, because it is increasing, you're going to put a positive infinity. Because that tells me that on the right side, the arrow is increasing. On the left side, the arrow is increasing. On the right side, this arrow is not going up, it is going down. So for your right behavior, you're not going to put a positive infinity, you're going to put a negative infinity. And that is what your in behavior statement means. Let's go ahead and rewrite our in behavior statement on this second graph. So x approaches negative infinity, f of x approaches, and we're going to put a line on the right side. X approaches positive infinity, f of x approaches, and we're going to put a line. So we have the left. This is my left arrow. This is the right arrow. So I'll give you a minute to write that out, and then we'll figure out what is the graph doing. Yes, Daniel? It's going straight. So this time, because it's a horizontal line, the graph isn't going up or down. It's going straight. And what does y equal right here? What is this y value? 2. So on the left side, it's approaching 2. And on the right side, it's approaching 2. So when you do your in behavior, it's either going to be positive infinity, negative infinity, or it can be a number when it's a horizontal line. Because when we look at, again, let's talk about why is that 2. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So this line is at y equals 2. All right, we have a few more graphs and then we'll do our practice. All right, this one was already written for us, so we don't need to write it out. But this is what I'm going to make sure you notice. Notice how this says positive infinity. So do you think this is the left side or the right side? The right. So let's go ahead and write that right here so that we don't get confused. This is the right arrow and this is the left arrow. So this is my left arrow, and this is my right arrow. What is my arrow doing? On this one, they're doing the same thing. What are they doing? What is the end of the graph doing on the left side? Is it going up or down? Up. And on the right side, it's also going up. So our end behavior for both, we're going to write positive infinity. All right, I want you to try to do this next one by yourself. See if you can fill in the blank. Remember, the first blank is right and the second blank is left. All right, so what is the graph doing on the right side? It's going up. So what did you put on this blank? Positive infinity. Good job. And what is the graph doing on the left? It's going down. So what did you put? Negative infinity. And that is in behavior. So homework 3 is due tomorrow. There's only one question left, and that would be question number 5. You should be able to do that.